In front of me are 4 different styles of football boots, 4 different upper materials, and 4 different feeling football boots. And in today's video, I'm going to show you about how to clean and maintain your football boots so that they last as long as possible. Let's jump into it. All right, so I have 3 rules of thumb for all of the football boots before we jump into each one. Rule number 1 is never dry the boots synthetically. So it's really bad for your football boots, especially for those leather and coated materials, when you put something under a heater, or I've even seen some people try and dry their boots in a microwave or an oven. Really not the best idea. You always want to dry your boots, quote unquote, naturally. Now, that does mean that you can put any sort of newspaper or even tissue paper. I probably wouldn't recommend tissues or toilet paper just because they're very thin and can fray really easily, and then it's just a mess to try and deal with. But a newspaper, an uncoated magazine, things like that you can just sort of stuff in there, even a towel in some circumstances where you can get some of the moisture out while drying. The next rule of thumb is always use brushes or sponges that are a little bit more on the soft side. So in the same way that you would identify a hard, a medium, and a soft toothbrush, how the bristles are, you want to stick to the soft side when doing any sort of cleaning on a football boot like this. Little bit different story on a sole plate. Obviously, you don't want to rub off any of the chrome elements in the case of a boot like the GX2. But at the end of the day, once the chrome elements have worn off, you're not really going to affect the durability of a sole plate, so you can use kind of whatever you want. But in terms of uppers, you really want to stick to the soft style of bristles or the soft side of a sponge. The final piece of advice that applies to all 4 of these football boots is really, once it gets dirty, as soon as the session or the game is done, you want to try and get as much of that material off as possible. That way, sure, there might be a little bit of color staining or something, but you don't want that material to dry, because once it dries, it's going to be, number 1, a lot more difficult to get off, but number 2, in the case of a leather, it can actually suck some of the oils and the moisture out of the treated leather and really cause it to crack and get really bad over time. So make sure that you get mud off immediately after use. And then 2 things not to do. So the first thing is you should never submerge your boot into hot water or water in general. Especially with hot water, it can actually damage the seam of your football boot. So we're not even talking about the upper stability at that point. You can actually completely tear the glue that has the upper and the sole plate locked together. So really make sure you're not submerging your boots 100% in water. The second piece of advice is really avoiding harsh chemicals and alcohol-based cleaners, especially on the more natural style of boot. It can really damage the leather. And then on the synthetic side or on the knit side, you can really see damage to those fibers that make up the density and the comfort and plushness of a knit, a woven, or a synthetic boot. So in terms of leather maintenance, longevity, and care, this is a topic that we get often at Ultra Football. Questions about, how do I take care of my leather football boots? How do I clean them? I personally get a lot on my own channels. And this is a pair of football boots, same with Mizuno and even some of the other brands that offer leather football boots. It's something that you really have to be careful of. Now, this is, of course, an FG sole plate, which means you really only should be wearing these football boots on an FG surface. And in fact, you lose warranty if you wear them on AG. So let's say you take care of them on AG and they end up breaking, but you've worn this FG pair on AG, you actually lose the ability to return them because of any sort of defect, because it's quote unquote the wrong surface type. Now, if you're gonna wear them on the surface they're meant for, so let's assume that I have this football boot and I've only worn it on a firm ground pitch and they get really muddy, a beautifully white football boot like this gets absolutely disgusting. How do you take care of it? Now, there's a couple things that I wanna go over. One is, as I said before, you wipe the mud and the physical dirt off of the boot as soon as the session is over. Now, if there's a little bit of leather staining, if there's a little bit of discoloration, particularly in the knit collar area, which isn't the case obviously with some other leather football boots on the market, they don't have this knit material, but I'll go over that in just a second. This is a boot that you want to take care of really nicely, because then this leather is going to stay buttery soft for you over the course of its lifespan. As soon as that's done, you want to let it dry and then take it home, and really, I would put newspaper in here. I would put maybe a really nice dry towel in here, something to sort of soak up some of that excess moisture that it's going to cause the leather to crack. With the synthetic midfoot, you're not going to have too much of an issue, but it does behave quite a bit like natural leather, so you just want to be cautious there. Then moving to cleaning. Now you can use a non-alcohol based cleaner, a really gentle soap. I even have used things like baby shampoo on my football boots before to get some of the staining out of the leather, and that seems to work really well without compromising any of the treatment that's been done to this leather as well. So that's something you can consider. I use a toothbrush usually for really gentle kind of scrubbing on the upper, particularly here in the midfoot where you've got these little grooves and creases where the Adidas striping logo is. And then here on the forefoot of a boot like this, I highly recommend just using a super soft sponge or even a wet towel to basically just sort of wipe off that material. Do keep in mind that a white boot is going to get dirty over time. That's just product of playing in your football boots, and in my opinion, that's a great thing. You can sort of prove to the world that you are training really hard when your football boots get dirty. Of course, you want to keep the mud and stuff off of it because it can take down the integrity of the football boot. But at the end of the day, this is a boot that is meant to be worn, meant to be enjoyed, and meant to ball out in. Now moving on to the synthetic material from the Adidas F50. Now, in my opinion, synthetic materials are probably the least worrisome when it comes to any sort of damage that you're going to do to the upper based on cleaning. I still usually use something like baby shampoo or baby soap because it is the most, quote unquote, most gentle on a football boot, but it is going to be really good for getting those little pieces of dirt off or any staining and stuff as well. And this is from the synthetic upper all the way to kind of this heel area where you've got a little bit more exposed cloth material, if you will. Now, as I said before, the sole plate is going to be just fine in terms of cleaning. You can really use whatever you want. There are some really cool brushes you can also buy that's got like a hose attached to them, so you can basically do any sort of cleaning on it and it will shoot water underneath the sponge and get them cleaned off really nicely. But from an upper perspective, this is a type of football boot that, sure, be gentle, use the soft side of a toothbrush or a soft side of any sort of brush that you have, or sponge in that case. But I don't think you need to be as gentle with a boot like this in terms of cleaning, because this is a much more robust and synthetic material that's going to last a lot longer in terms of its durability and in terms of the way that, you can basically rub this as hard as you want and it won't deteriorate over time like a leather boot will. Woven football boots are where it starts to get really interesting from a cleaning perspective, because woven boots like the Alpha and like uncoated woven boots like a Velocita Matrix from Umbro that we have here in store as well, that's an uncoated, meaning that there's no synthetic coating over the top of that weave material. And the Pro Weave in particular from Umbro can be quite a bit finicky, shall we say, but for a woven football boot, I like to be as gentle as possible. Very similar with the knit, which we'll go over in just a second, but a boot like the Alpha has such a thin upper that you really want to be gentle with the way that you clean this. So realistically, when I'm looking at a Mizuno Alpha, my own pair of boots, in fact, when it gets really muddy and really gross, this is an upper that will actually kind of wash away pretty easily in terms of there's a bunch of mud on there and it'll wash away pretty easily without a bunch of staining. A boot like the Velocita Matrix will stain quite a bit because it's an untreated upper, which makes it very, very comfortable. But of course, it's going to come with the downside of getting dirty pretty quickly. As I said before in this video, getting dirty is not an issue because football boots are meant to be worn and enjoyed. In the case of the Alpha though, really nice, light sponging on the upper. I wouldn't douse this in water. As I said before, you're going to ruin the seam between the upper and the sole plate, but light sponge, really, really gentle toothbrush if you have to. I would stick to a really light sponge or even a microfiber towel to sort of just gently rub this, because you don't want this upper, this 5-layer upper, to start to split and fray, which can happen with a boot like this. And finally, we move on to the knit material, which in my opinion is actually even more finicky in terms of cleaning than the leather materials. So even something like a Mizuno Morelia 2 made in Japan is going to be fairly straightforward to clean. Leather seems to last a really long time. You can obviously add leather food to that as well if you want to soften it up over time, but the knit is something you have to be really, really careful of, even with a boot like this that's a pre-coated yarn. So in my personal opinion, this is a boot that you want to be super gentle with, especially in this new colorway. This is one of those, and all the chromatic pack boots, in fact, other than the Tiempo, I would say really be gentle with this material. Number one is if you're too harsh with a grip knit or a knit in general, you can actually completely split open that grippy texturing material, which not only takes away some performance benefits, but it also completely ruins the way that the boots are going to perform over time because they're going to way overstretch. The whole point of the synthetic is to keep that knit material in a relatively predetermined shape. Now, from another reason why you want to be really careful is because you can actually basically rub and fray the knit material, right? If you take a sock and you have some sort of cleaning material and you do that with it over and over and over again, the sock is going to start to fray. That's the same thing that happens with a knit boot like this. So just be very, very gentle with a boot like this. And especially if you're going to buy something from the Chromatic Pack that's a knit that's also white, you want to be very careful that you just sort of accept that they're going to get dirty over time, particularly if it's an FG stud pattern like this and you're playing on FG surfaces. All right, so that is my cleaning advice across all of the different upper materials. Now, if you guys have any more things you would like to see from us at Ultra Football, leave them down in the comments section below. Let me know which type of boot you have and your most effective cleaning advice. As far as how really they all go, again, just be gentle, have patience, make sure as soon as the session's done, you clean off all the mud or all the dirt or all the grass, and then dry them out, and then you're able to add leather food to something like a Copa or a Morelia 2, and then just be really, really gentle when cleaning because you want to make sure that the boots last you a really long time. Part of the reason that my boots last so long, even though I wear them all the freaking time, is because I take care of them and I clean them, not too aggressively, but just make sure that they are in tip-top shape. And, oh, by the way, your boots are meant to get dirty because they're meant to be worn, and that is why we absolutely love football boots here at Ultra Football. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Head over to our Instagram at Ultra Football. My name is Noah Kavanaugh. I'll see you guys next time at the world's greatest football store.